Hello, welcome to Chapter 1, Section 1, Part 2. Okay, these notes are going to be over domain and range, and interval notation and set notation. So how to write domain and range, not as an inequality, but as an interval or a set. First, before we start talking about domain and range for these particular examples, let's talk about it in general. Now we know domain is the set of all possible values of x, so x values. What we have to remember is that when we're talking about x values, we're always going in a certain order. It is always, always, always left to right, in that order. X from left to right. For y, so for range, we're talking about the set of all possible values of y. Y is go from bottom to top. Bottom to top. And it's super, super important when you're writing something in interval notation that you do it in the correct order, because if for some reason you were to write it from right to left, you'd get the entire thing wrong. Okay, so don't do that. Now let's look at this orange example first. I'll do the whole thing, all three notations with the orange example, and then the blue one. So for domain, domain is left to right. If we look at this graph, the farthest left value looks like it's about right there. Okay? Well, that left value, that x value for the domain, is -2. And you should be able to recognize that by now. Now on the right, it goes to the right, but it has this arrow up here. So as it's going that way, it will continue on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Because it continues on forever, that gets an infinity. Now, open circles always get parentheses, and infinities always get parentheses. So that's how you would write your domain for this particular function in interval notation. Now let's talk about range. Range is bottom to top. Okay, so now this is what gets to people. We have to talk about y values now. Y values. So instead of talking about left to right, we're talking about bottom to top, and we're talking about the y value. Okay, I cannot emphasize that more, because so many people mess this up. Okay, and it's okay if you do the first couple of times, but we want to make sure you don't. So the lowest value that we have here, and I said lowest, would occur right here. Right? Because as we go up, we will go up from there. Right? Because this graph goes up from there. The y value right there is not -2. It is 0. Okay? It is 0. That is the lowest y value. Lots of times people mess up and they put the lowest x value, which doesn't make sense. Okay? Because it's range. It's always y values. Now the highest y value, there isn't one, because it'll go on forever and ever and ever, just like the domain did. And so it also gets an infinity. Now, the notation is actually the same as for the domain, because there was an open circle and an infinity. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change that to an inequality, and that shouldn't be too hard. For inequalities, you actually include the letter. So we have x and y. So how is x, what is x doing? Well, what values of x do we have? We have x values that are greater than -2. How do I know that? Because it's going to the right. From -2 to the right forever and ever and ever. So I have x values greater than -2. I have y values greater than 0. And I knew that because it started at 0 and it went up forever. All right? So that's actually something you should have already known how to do. You learned it in Algebra 1. Now the new thing, the second new thing, is the set notation. And I did talk about it in the first video. And the only difference between an inequality and set notation is that there are braces, the letter, and a such that. All right, so we have braces, the letter, such that, and then you write the inequality. So it's actually a little bit harder to figure out what the inequality is than it is to write it in set notation. Okay, so let's do range. For range, we're actually talking about y's. So we'd have a y such that y is greater than 0. And that's it, we're done. Let's go to the second example. Well, the second example is this one over here. And again, I'm going to start with domain. So pay very, very close attention, all right? Because domain is always left to right. Now this time, instead of it going on forever and ever, it does have 2 endpoints. Okay, it's got this on the left and this on the right. So this is left and this is right. Okay? The left x value is -5. We put a comma, and then we put the right x value, which is -2. Then we just have to pay attention to whether or not they're open or closed. The one on the left is closed, so it gets a bracket. The one on the right is open, so it gets a parentheses. And that's it. That was our domain. Now this bothers people, what I'm about to talk about, and that is the range. Range is bottom to top. Okay? So this point right here is not the lowest point. The lowest point is actually right here. Right here. Right there. That is the bottom. That is the top. Because I have a graph between those two values, those two y values. Okay, so you have to pay attention. Now, the bottom value, the lowest y value, is -2. Now, the reason it's -2 is because that's the y value right here. Okay? So I'm just going to put that point there, just so you know it is a point, right? It's a point on my graph, so it has to be close. It's required to be close because it's included in my picture. Okay? The only time you have an open circle is if you have an open circle. All right? So if it's not open, it's closed, and that's it. End of story. Now the top value is at 2. So you put a comma and then 2. I just said that the bottom is closed. The top is clearly closed, so they both get brackets. Okay, so if you have questions over that, make sure you're writing it down on the side, right? Very specific questions that you can ask when you get to class. Now let's write them as inequalities. Okay, so we've talked about inequalities before. For domain, x is in the middle because it is bounded on both ends. So we've got x in the middle. We've got our less thans. We've got -5 and -2. The only question is it going to have an or equal to? And the -5 will, because it was a bracket. Right? Notice, side note, this has a line, and that has a line. All right, so they kind of match. For the range, we're going to do the exact same thing. We've got -2 less than y less than 2. And we have to make sure we have our or equals to if needed. And they both need it because they're both brackets. And that's it. So now we just have to translate that into set notation. I told you the only difference between an inequality and set notation is the braces, the letter, the such that, and then you write your inequality. So let's do that. We've got our braces. The letter for domain is x, such that -5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than -2. Range, braces, y, such that -2 less than or equal to y, less than or equal to 2. And that is your video. Have a good day.